It was a bright morning at the edge of a quiet town. The sun was already shining, and the sound of heavy machines echoed across the construction site. It was the kind of day that felt normal to everyone who worked there. The crew had arrived early, wearing their hard hats and work boots. Some of them were sipping hot coffee, standing around their trucks, talking about their plans for the weekend. Others were checking their equipment, ready to start their long shift. The site was busy, but in a way that felt calm and routine. No one had any idea that this day would turn into something they would never forget. Among the workers, it was also a security team. They were not unusual at a construction site this big. Their job was to make sure no one got in without permission and that everything stayed safe. But what made this team a little special was the presence of a canine German shepherd named Rex. He was a strong, smart, and loyal dog. His black and tan fur shone in the sunlight, and his ears always stood tall, listening carefully to every sound around him. Everyone at the site liked Rex. He was friendly when people petted him, but also serious when it was time to work. Rex had been trained for special security work. He could sniff out things that humans couldn't smell. He could sense danger before anyone else. Most of the time, he spent his mornings walking around the fence line with his handler, a calm and focused man named Officer James. They checked every corner to make sure the site was safe before the crew started using the CD machines. It was part of their daily routine, something they had done many times before. But this morning, something was different. When they reached the far corner of the site, near a pile of dirt and broken concrete, Rex suddenly stopped walking. His body became stiff, and his ears turned toward the ground. He sniffed the air with quick, short breaths. Officer James noticed it right away. He had worked with Rex for years and knew the difference between casual curiosity and serious alert. Rex wasn't just sniffing the ground for fun. He had sensed something unusual. The construction workers nearby didn't pay much attention at first. Dogs sometimes stopped to sniff at random spots. Maybe there was a rabbit or an old food wrapper buried in the dirt. But Rex didn't move on. His nose stayed glued to the same patch of earth. He circled the area once, twice, and then 3 times. Then he lowered his head closer to the ground and gave a soft, low growl. Officer James gently tugged at his leash, but Rex resisted, pulling back with surprising strength for his size. "Hey, what's going on with your dog today?" one of the workers asked with a smile, holding a cup of coffee. Officer James didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on Rex. The dog was acting like something serious was under that ground. Rex barked sharply once, then again, louder this time. The sound carried across the site, making several heads turn. One of the machine operators, who was about to start his bulldozer, paused with his hand on the ignition. Rex began to dig. His front paws kicked up dust and dirt in quick, strong strokes. It was not playful digging. He was focused, almost too focused. Officer James tried to calm him, but Rex was determined. He kept returning to the exact same spot, scratching the surface and sniffing deeper. A few workers slowly walked closer, curious to see what was happening. At first, one of them joked, "What did he find? A bone?" Others laughed lightly, but there was an edge of uneasiness in their voices. They could see the dog wasn't joking around. His tail was stiff, not wagging. His breathing had changed. The sound of his paws hitting the dirt grew faster, like he wanted to get to something buried below. The morning that had started so normally was beginning to feel strange. The usual chatter of the workers grew quiet as more of them gathered near the corner of the site. The sound of digging machines slowed down, and one by one, they stopped. Even the birds perched on the power lines nearby seemed quieter, as if they, too, were waiting to see what would happen next. Officer James gave Rex some space, but stayed close. He spoke to him softly, the way handlers do when they need their dogs to stay focused. Rex's ears twitched at the sound of his handler's voice, but he didn't stop. His paws were covered with dirt now, but he kept going like something was pulling him forward. By this point, at least a dozen workers were standing around the spot, forming a loose circle. Some crossed their arms. Some bent forward to get a better look. Others exchanged glances, but didn't say anything. It wasn't like Rex to act without reason. He had a strong record of alerting the team only when something truly mattered. Officer James finally took out his radio and informed the site supervisor that Rex had found something suspicious. The supervisor, a tall man in a yellow hard hat, arrived a few minutes later, wiping sweat from his forehead. He wasn't sure what to make of it. "It's probably nothing," he said, trying to keep the mood light. But even he could feel that something wasn't normal. Rex kept digging, and the smell of freshly turned earth filled the air. His claws scratched against something harder beneath the dirt, a faint sound that made everyone freeze for a second. Officer James heard it too. He knelt beside Rex and moved some dirt with his own gloved hands. Something solid was under there. The supervisor ordered the crew to stop all heavy machinery and keep the area clear. "Let the dog work," he said firmly. No one argued. The energy at the site had shifted completely now. The light jokes from earlier were gone. Everyone's faces were serious, their eyes locked on the hole growing slowly wider. Rex paused for a moment, looking at his handler, then back at the ground. His bark came again, deep and strong, echoing through the quiet site. Even those who had been standing far away came closer to see. Dust floated in the air, catching the sunlight. The sound of shovels and boots on the dirt replaced the earlier noise of machines. It was still morning, but the crew already knew this wasn't going to be just another day at work. There was something hidden beneath that ground, something the dog had found when no one else could sense it. The construction workers who just minutes ago were talking about their lunch breaks now stood silent, waiting. Officer James placed a steady hand on Rex's back, feeling the dog's heartbeat racing. In that moment, it didn't matter how ordinary the day had started. Something extraordinary was about to unfold. And deep down, every single person standing there felt it. The construction site was no longer just a place to build. It had become a place where a mystery was slowly waking up from the dirt. Because a loyal canine had decided not to ignore what others couldn't see. The air at the construction site grew heavier as time passed. What started as curiosity was slowly turning into quiet tension. Rex, the canine German shepherd, refused to stop digging at that patch of ground. His paws were covered with dirt now, but his movements were sharp and steady, not playful or random. He kept lowering his nose into the soil, letting out small huffs between each breath. The workers who once stood at a distance were now closer, their faces serious, their voices almost gone. Everyone could feel that something wasn't right. Even if they didn't yet understand what it was, Officer James stood beside Rex, holding the leash firmly but not pulling him away. He trusted the dog. They had worked together for years, and Rex had never given false signals. When Rex acted like this, it always meant something was down there. Around them, the sound of big construction machines slowly faded as more workers turned off their engines. One by one, the rumbling of heavy equipment stopped. The site that was usually filled with noise was now strangely quiet. The supervisor stepped forward. He was trying to stay calm, but his brow was furrowed. "How long has he been like this?" he asked Officer James. "Since we got here," James answered softly. "He doesn't want to leave the spot. Something's buried here. I can feel it." The workers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them whispered, "Maybe it's just an old pipe or something." Dogs sniff weird things sometimes. But even as he said it, he didn't sound sure. Rex barked again, louder this time. It was the kind of bark that made the hair on the back of your neck rise. He started digging faster, kicking up dirt behind him. A thin cloud of dust floated into the air. Two workers grabbed shovels to help clear the loose soil, moving carefully. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody made jokes. The mood was serious now. The more they dug, the more the smell of earth filled the air. Rex kept pressing his nose into the hole as if trying to guide them. Officer James gave him small commands in a calm voice, but the dog didn't need much direction. He knew exactly what he was doing. A worker named Tom knelt down near the hole. "There's something hard down here," he said quietly. His hand brushed against something buried under the dirt. It didn't feel like just rocks. Everyone around him leaned a little closer. Rex lowered his head and let out a deep growl, not aggressive, but warning. He stepped back slightly and sat, still alert, his eyes locked on the hole. The supervisor raised a hand. Stop digging for a second." The crew froze. The air felt thick. A few birds flew over the site, but even they seemed distant. Tom brushed away some more soil with his gloved hand. A dull thump echoed when his fingers hit something solid. It wasn't a pipe. It was wood. "What is that?" another worker whispered. Nobody answered. Officer James bent down, careful not to disturb anything. He brushed a small area of the surface clean with his hand. It looked like the corner of an old wooden box. The wood was rough, dirty, and looked like it had been there for years. It was buried deep, hidden from sight all this time. Rex gave a small whine as if he knew this was serious. The supervisor took a step back and grabbed his radio. "No one touches anything else," he said in a firm voice. "This might be evidence. We're calling it in." Within minutes, other workers were asked to step back. The ones who stayed behind formed a loose circle around the spot. It felt like everyone was holding their breath. The warm morning sun now seemed harsher, as if it was shining too brightly on something that was meant to stay hidden. "Officer." James knelt beside Rex and gently rubbed his neck. "Good boy," he whispered, but his own heart was beating faster. He didn't know what they were about to find, but he knew it wouldn't be ordinary. While they waited for the local authorities, the crew talked quietly among themselves. Some guessed it might be an old-time capsule, something from a long time ago. Others thought it could be the remains of an old storage box from when the land was used for something else. But no matter what they said, no one truly believed it was something simple. The weight of the moment was too strong. The wind picked up, blowing a few loose papers across the site. A worker adjusted his helmet nervously. Tom stepped away from the hole, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I don't like this," he said softly. Another worker nodded slowly. Rex stood tall now, his eyes scanning the area. His job was not just to find, but to protect. He positioned himself near the hole, between it and the people, as if guarding it. His ears twitched at every sound. The supervisor told everyone to stay back until the police arrived. He also ordered the heavy machines to be turned off completely. The beeping of reversing trucks and the metal clanking of cranes stopped. The silence grew even heavier. Rex's handler kept a firm grip on the leash, but didn't pull him away. The dog seemed calm but focused, like he understood the seriousness of the situation. His tail was down, not wagging, and his breathing was steady. When the police cars finally arrived, their tires crunched over the gravel road. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, followed by a plain-clothed investigator. The crew moved aside to give them space. Rex's handler quickly explained everything the way the dog had refused to leave the spot, the digging, the wooden surface they had found beneath the soil. The officers carefully approached the hole. One of them knelt down and shined a flashlight on the box. "Looks old," he said quietly. "Very old." Rex let out another low growl, not at them, but toward the ground. It was his way of saying something important was still down there. The police set up a small tape barrier around the area, keeping the construction crew outside the circle. A few of the workers stood with their arms crossed. Others leaned on their shovels, but everyone kept their eyes on the same spot. Not a single person walked away. It was as if the ground itself was holding their attention. The lead officer radioed for backup and a forensic team. He didn't say it out loud, but the way he moved told everyone this was no simple box. Rex sat down quietly, but his eyes didn't move. He had done his job. Officer James gave Rex another soft pat on the head, whispering praise. The workers watched the police carefully mark the area and begin their own careful digging. Every shovel of dirt seemed to reveal something new more of the box. More clues that it had been here for a long time. The workers, who had spent years at this site, suddenly realized how little they knew about the ground beneath their feet. It wasn't just dirt and concrete anymore. It was holding secrets. Secrets that only a dog's nose could find. The wind blew across the open site again. But this time, it carried a different feeling. The jokes were gone, the morning chatter forgotten. Now, there was only quiet waiting, heavy steps, and the sound of the soil being slowly uncovered by careful hands. And right in the middle of it all sat Rex. Calm but alert, his eyes locked on the buried box. He didn't know the meaning of what they were about to find. But everyone else could feel it. This wasn't something small. It was something that had been hidden for years, and this was the day it had finally been found. The crew stood in complete silence as the police began their careful work. The once loud and busy construction site had turned into a place where every movement was slow and cautious. The wooden box that Rex had uncovered was no longer just a strange object buried under dirt. It was now the center of everyone's attention. Even the birds that usually flew overhead seemed to avoid the area. As if sensing the heaviness in the air, the plain-clothed investigator, a calm and steady woman with a flashlight in her hand, knelt near the box. She gently brushed away more dirt with a small tool, not wanting to damage anything. The uniformed officers stood close, making sure no one from the construction crew crossed the yellow tape that was now wrapped around the area. Rex sat quietly beside Officer James, his tail resting on the ground, his eyes fixed on the hole. "This is old," the investigator said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "Very old." The supervisor of the site shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. "We've been digging here for months," he said quietly to one of the workers. "How could something like this stay hidden?" Tom, the worker who first felt the wooden surface, shook his head. "Because we weren't looking," he replied. His voice was low, almost like a whisper. Everyone standing there knew that if Rex hadn't found it, the box would have remained underground, buried and forgotten. The investigator carefully signaled to the officers. They slowly widened the digging area so they could pull the box out without breaking it. The sound of metal shovels hitting the earth echoed softly through the site. The workers stood behind the tape, watching every movement. Some had their hands in their pockets, some had crossed arms, some just stared silently with wide eyes. Rex's ears perked up as the box shifted slightly. It was heavier than they expected. Dirt fell off the sides as the officers lifted it a few inches to loosen it from the ground. Officer James kept Rex calm with gentle touches, but the dog's breathing changed short and quick. He could sense something unusual inside. "Easy, easy," the investigator said to the team. Slowly, the box came out of the ground and was placed on a clean tarp. The wood was dark and cracked with age. It was covered in mud and small roots. No one spoke. Even the workers who normally made jokes during serious moments stayed silent. They all understood that something important, maybe even life-changing, was inside that box. The investigator put on gloves and leaned closer to examine it. She noticed old nails along the edges, rusted but still holding. She gently tapped the lid. It didn't budge. One of the officers handed her a small crowbar. When she slowly pried open the top, the sound of wood creaking filled the air. Everyone seemed to take a breath at the same time. Rex's tail twitched, but he stayed seated, focused on the box. The lid finally came loose with a soft crack, and when the investigator lifted it, the entire crew leaned forward without realizing it. Inside the box, there were layers of fabric, faded and dirty with time. At first, it was hard to tell what anything was. The investigator carefully pulled back a corner of the cloth. A small object rolled slightly to the side. It was an old toy, a little stuffed bear with one button missing. A quiet gasp moved through the group of workers. Next to the toy, there were other items too. A pair of tiny shoes, a photograph with edges curled from age, and a small tin box with something inside. The investigator opened the tin carefully and found a necklace, old and rusted but still recognizable. The air grew even heavier. These weren't just random things. These belonged to someone. The supervisor took off his hard hat, holding it against his chest. The workers who had been standing straight now leaned on the fence tape, eyes wide. "This is," one of them whispered, but the words didn't come out fully. The investigator slowly lifted the photograph. Though faded, the image showed a small child smiling next to a woman. It looked like something from many years ago. The investigator nodded to the officer beside her. He immediately pulled out a notepad and started making notes. This wasn't just a discovery, it was evidence of a real person's past. Rex let out a low sound. It's like a quiet whine, then looked up at Officer James. He wasn't nervous, but alert. Dogs like Rex had a way of sensing the weight of human emotions, even if they didn't understand the story behind it. James gently patted his head, whispering, "Good boy. You found something important?" The investigator carefully arranged the items inside evidence bags. Every movement was slow and respectful. She didn't rush. She understood that each piece could be part of a much bigger story. The workers watched as the police team laid everything out neatly on a folding table. Near their vehicle, one of the younger workers whispered, "Do you think this is connected to something big?" An older worker beside him replied softly, "Things like this don't just happen for no reason. There's a story here. A long one." The investigator turned to the site supervisor. "We'll need to search the area around the hole. There might be more." The supervisor nodded quickly. "Of course. Whatever you need." His voice was steady, but anyone could see the way his hands fidgeted with the edge of his hard hat. Meanwhile, Rex was still seated, his eyes never leaving the box. He tilted his head slightly when one of the officers lifted the old toy bear. It was small, but it carried a kind of quiet sadness. The fabric was torn, and the stitching was loose. But it was still clearly a child's toy. The investigator noticed how the crew was reacting: quiet, focused, and a little pale. She spoke gently. "We don't know the full story yet," she said, "but I can tell you this is very old, and it's personal. We'll handle it with care." Officer James looked down at Rex and then back at the investigator. If Rex hadn't found it, it might have stayed buried for years. She nodded slowly. Or forever. A truck driver who worked on the site almost every day shook his head in disbelief. "We've been driving machines over this spot for weeks," he said softly. "And all this time, this box was right underneath us." The police marked the area with more tape, making it a small, restricted zone. They brought out ground scanning tools to check if there was anything else nearby. The construction crew stood back, giving them space, but no one left. Even those who were supposed to be on lunch break stayed, as the investigation continued. The sun climbed higher in the sky, but the workers didn't seem to notice the heat. Their minds were stuck on the discovery. It wasn't just the box that mattered, it was what it represented. Someone, many years ago, had placed these things in the ground with care. It wasn't random. The investigator and her team carefully lifted the box into the back of their vehicle. Rex stood up as they moved it, following it with his eyes. Officer James gave him another soft pat, proud of his partner. The construction crew stepped aside as the vehicle slowly drove off, carrying the mystery with it. But even as the police left, the site didn't return to normal. The hole remained. The image of that little toy bear and the tiny shoes stayed in everyone's mind. Nobody wanted to turn their machines back on. It was the turning point of the day, the moment when a normal work shift turned into a story. None of them would forget. And at the center of it all was a loyal K9, who had refused to ignore what lay beneath the surface. Rex didn't know the meaning of the old toy, the photograph, or the necklace. But in his own quiet way, he had done something remarkable. He had found the hidden beginning of a mystery, one that had been waiting, buried in silence for years. The afternoon sun hung high above the construction site, but no one felt its warmth anymore. The crew that had started their morning with easy laughter and simple plans now stood in small, quiet groups, speaking in low voices. The ground that Rex had dug up was surrounded by yellow tape and markers, a clear sign that this place was no longer just a work site. It had become a part of something bigger, something serious. The box and its contents were already taken by the police. But the hole it came from remained. It wasn't deep, but everyone kept their distance from it, as if the ground itself had changed. Heavy machines were parked silently in the background. Their engines were off. The air, once filled with the sound of drills and shovels, was now still, except for the soft rustling of the wind. Rex stood close to Officer James, his leash loose, but his body still alert. His ears twitched at every sound. He didn't know the human meaning behind the discovery, but he could feel the tension around him. The crew had always liked Rex for his calm nature, but now, as they watched him quietly standing near the place he had found the box, they saw him in a new way. A short while later, police vehicles returned, this time with more people. There were investigators, a forensics team, and a few officers carrying specialized equipment. Their presence made it clear this wasn't going to be solved in a few minutes. Something about the contents of that box had triggered a deeper script investigation. The investigator from earlier stepped out of her car and walked straight toward Officer James. Her face was serious but calm. She knelt to pat Rex on the head gently. "Good dog," she said softly, then looked up at James. "We checked the items. They're very old. And we also found something inside the fabric that could help identify where they came from." James nodded slowly, listening carefully. "We need to scan the area around the hole," she continued. "If there's more down there, this could be a bigger case than we thought." Meant. James gave Rex a small command to sit. The dog obeyed immediately, but kept his eyes on the digging area. Meanwhile, the forensic team set up ground scanners. They used long rods and handheld machines that made soft beeping sounds. The construction crew gathered at a safe distance to watch, still too curious to leave but careful not to get in the way. Tom, the worker who had first touched the wooden box, stood with his arms crossed. His face looked tired, not from physical work, but from the weight of the day. "You think they'll find more?" Another worker asked him quietly. Tom didn't answer right away. He just stared at the hole and finally whispered, "I think this ground is hiding more than we ever knew."
Ow.
The forensic scanners began to beep steadily. One of the officers marked several new spots with small orange flags. It wasn't just one location anymore. The scanner was picking up something else buried nearby. The crew's murmurs grew louder. Even Officer James felt his chest tighten slightly. He trusted Rex's instincts, and if the dog had been that focused this morning, it was likely there was more. The investigators signaled her team to start digging carefully at the flagged spots. They didn't use big machines. Instead, they used shovels and small tools to avoid damaging anything underground. Every movement was slow and deliberate. Rex watched them closely, occasionally letting out a soft huff as the digging went on. One of the forensic team members suddenly stopped and raised a hand. "I think we've hit something," he said in a low but clear voice. Everyone standing nearby froze for a second. The crew stepped closer to the tape, holding their breath again. The officers widened the hole with care. Dirt fell away slowly, and soon more pieces of wood came into view. Another box exactly, but broken wooden boards. The edges were jagged, and some were covered with pieces of cloth that looked like they had been there for years. The investigator's face grew more serious. The supervisor of the site wiped his forehead nervously. "We've been working here for months," he whispered. "And all this was right under us." One of the officers carefully lifted a board. Underneath, there were more personal items. An old metal lunchbox, a pair of small shoes covered in mud, a hair ribbon, faded almost white with time. The crowd around the tape gasped softly. These were not random trash or construction leftovers. They were signs of people, of stories, of lives from long ago. Rex gave a short bark and stood up. Officer James knelt beside him. "Easy, boy," he whispered. But Rex wasn't agitated. He was alert again. His nose pointed toward another part of the ground, just a few feet from where the team was digging. The investigator noticed this and nodded. "He smells something else." "Mark that area," she told one of the officers. The forensic team moved toward the new spot, and the scanning machine confirmed it. Another signal underground. The digging started again, careful and quiet. The construction crew watched with wide eyes, their earlier tiredness forgotten. Minutes turned into an hour, but no one left. It was as if they were watching a hidden story slowly rise to the surface. Finally, one of the team members pulled out a wrapped bundle of old fabric. It was tied with a ribbon, fragile and stained with dirt. Inside it, they found more small items, letters, folded carefully and sealed in plastic sleeves. Probably placed long ago. The investigator looked at them closely but didn't open them there. She placed everything into evidence bags carefully. "This was placed here with intention," she said softly. "Someone wanted this hidden." Tom rubbed his arm nervously. "Why here, though? Why under a construction site?" The investigator looked up. "It wasn't a construction site back then," she said. "This land probably had a different history." Rex sat again beside James, calm now, his work almost done for the day. The dog didn't need to understand history. His job was to find what others couldn't see or smell, and he had done it perfectly. The forensic team kept working, collecting every piece, photographing every inch of the area. The sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the site. The workers who usually left early stayed. No one wanted to turn their backs on what was happening. The investigator finally stood up and addressed the group gently. "I can't tell you all the details yet," she said, "but what your dog found today is very important. These items are from many years ago, and they may help us solve something long forgotten." The crew didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the day settle over them. For some reason, even those who didn't believe in fate felt like Rex was meant to find this. Officer James walked Rex toward the group, and some of the workers reached out to pet him gently. Rex wagged his tail lightly now, sensing the calm returning. A few workers smiled faintly, still shaken but grateful that something special had happened here. The investigator and her team packed up the evidence carefully. Every item was sealed, labeled, and stored. They put up a temporary cover over the dug-up areas to protect them overnight. More teams would return the next day to continue searching as the sun set. The construction site no longer looked like a place of work. It looked like a place where secrets had finally spoken after being silent for so long. The sound of the wind moving through the empty machinery felt almost like whispers from the past. Rex and Officer James walked slowly toward their vehicle. The crew followed behind, their boots crunching softly against the gravel. No one talked much, but they all shared the same feeling, a strange mix of surprise, sadness, and quiet respect. Before leaving, Tom turned back and looked at the spot where Rex had first started digging. "That dog. He didn't just find a box," he said softly. "He found a story." Everyone who heard him knew he was right. The ground had held its secret for years, but it took one dog's instincts, a simple paw against the dirt, to bring it all to light. This moment would stay with them for a long, long time. The next morning, the construction site looked nothing like it had before. Usually by this time, the air was full of the sound of machines starting, workers shouting instructions, and the steady rhythm of work beginning. But on this day, everything felt slower and quieter. The yellow tape still surrounded the digging area. The ground was marked with small orange flags. Evidence markers lined the edge of the site where Rex had first started digging. It no longer looked like a place where something was being built. It looked like a place where a hidden story had been uncovered. The workers arrived early, but they didn't gather around their trucks laughing like they used to. Instead, they stood in small groups, looking toward the corner of the site where everything had happened. Some of them were still talking about the box, the toy, the old letters, and the strange feeling they couldn't shake. Tom arrived with a cup of coffee in his hand, just like he always did, but even his steps were slower. He walked toward the group of workers and said softly, "Can you believe all this time it was right under our feet?" His friend shook his head. "I can't stop thinking about it. It's like we were working on top of a secret, and we didn't even know." Rex and Officer James arrived a few minutes later. The moment the dog stepped onto the site, several workers smiled faintly. Rex wasn't just a security dog anymore. In their eyes, he was the reason the truth had come out. His calm steps and proud stance made the crew feel safe. Even as the air still carried a hint of mystery, police vehicles were already parked near the taped-off area. The investigator from the day before stood with the team, reviewing maps and old photographs of the land. There were more people this time, including a few officials from the town. They weren't just treating this like an ordinary find. The box and its contents had led to something bigger. When Officer James walked over, the investigator greeted him. "Morning, James." "Morning, Rex," she said gently, giving the dog a kind smile. "We've been digging through some records overnight. This land used to belong to a small farming family many decades ago. There are stories about someone who disappeared in this area a very long time ago." James listened quietly. He had worked with Rex on many assignments, but this one felt different. "So the box might be connected to that family?" he asked. The investigator nodded slowly. "Yes, the toy, the shoes, the letters, they're from that time." We've contacted local historians and people who've lived in this town for generations. They're helping us piece together the story." Tom overheard the conversation from a distance. He turned to the other workers and whispered, "So it's real. There really was something buried here for decades," another worker added softly, "and it wasn't the machines or any of us who found it. It was Rex. That dog changed everything." Rex didn't understand the words, but he could feel the way people looked at him. He wagged his tail slowly, calm but proud. Officer James knelt beside him and gave him a gentle pat on the chest. "Good boy," he whispered. Rex's ears twitched, and he leaned against his handler's leg. The forensics team continued to work carefully. They scanned the ground around the original hole again. A few more small items were found: a broken button, a rusted bracelet, a piece of a child's dress. Each item was carefully bagged and labeled. None of it was large, but every single thing told a piece of a story. By late morning, a small crowd had gathered near the gate of the site. They weren't workers, they were townspeople. News of the discovery had spread through the town overnight. People who had lived in the area for years came to see for themselves. Some remembered old stories told by their grandparents about a family that vanished during hard times. An older woman, wrapped in a shawl, stood at the fence and whispered to another, "My grandmother used to talk about this place. She said something was buried here. I thought it was just an old story." Another man nodded, his eyes fixed on the marked area. "It wasn't just a story, it seems. That dog brought it to life." The investigator stepped forward to talk to the small group. She explained gently that they were still learning the details and that it might take time to uncover the full truth. But what they found already connected to a real missing person case that had never been solved. For many of the townspeople, it was emotional. This wasn't just an investigation anymore. It was about remembering someone who had been forgotten for decades. Rex stayed close to Officer James during all of this, calm and focused. The construction crew treated him like a little hero. Tom even knelt down beside him and scratched behind his ears. "You've got a good nose, buddy," Tom said with a small smile. "You did something no one else could do." By midday, the police carefully removed the last few marked items from the ground. The forensic team began closing their equipment, and the investigator gathered her notes. She turned to the site supervisor and said, "We'll have a full report in the coming days, but what happened here is very important. You and your crew were part of something meaningful." The supervisor nodded quietly. "We'll never look at this land the same way again," he said. As the investigators packed up, the townspeople slowly began to leave too, talking in low voices about old stories and family names. Some of them even wiped tears from their eyes. For them, the discovery brought closure to a mystery that had lived only in whispers and fading memories. The construction crew remained for a while longer. Some leaned against their trucks, some sat on piles of wood, and some just stared at the place where the box had been found. They all felt like they had witnessed something special, something they would talk about for the rest of their lives. Rex sat on the gravel, his head high, eyes bright. He didn't know the full meaning of what he had uncovered. He only knew he had done what he was trained to do, trust his instincts. But to the people around him, he had done something extraordinary. Officer James looked at him with quiet pride. He knew how many lives his four-legged partner had touched over the years, but this felt different. This time Rex hadn't just protected someone. He had given a story back to a town. The sun was beginning to set when the crew finally started to pack their things. Work on the building would resume another day, but no one was in a hurry. They all knew this day wasn't about concrete or steel anymore. It was about memory, history, and a dog who wouldn't walk away from a patch of ground before leaving. Tom turned to Officer James and said, "You should know something. If it weren't for Rex, we would have just kept digging and building. We'd never have known what was down there." James smiled faintly and patted Rex again. "That's why he's special," he said softly. "He listens to things we can't hear." As they walked toward the truck, Rex turned his head back one last time, looking at the corner of the site. The sun painted everything in golden light, making the place look calm and quiet again. It was hard to believe something so big had been hidden beneath such ordinary ground, but that was the beauty of it. They're silent, buried, waiting for the right moment and the right soul to find them. Rex jumped into the back of the truck, curling up proudly. The crew waved as James started the engine. And as the truck rolled away, the workers knew they wouldn't forget this day. The ground they had worked on would be remembered, not for the building they were about to raise, but for the secret it finally gave back to the world. Some mysteries take years to be uncovered. Some stories wait in silence for a long time. But all it takes is one faithful dog, one small moment, and everything changes. And that's exactly what Rex did. He changed everything.